We now turn to higher education. Well, Chinese international students have become a staple in Western institutions in recent years. China has become an attractive choice as Chinese universities become more competitive worldwide. According to Times Higher Education World University Ranking for 2020, there are 6 universities from the Chinese mainland and Hong Kong that are now in the top 100, with Tsinghua University and Peking University leading the pack at 23rd and 24th. While international students traditionally came to China for language and culture immersion, more enlist in other universal courses such as science and engineering. As the world's second-largest economy, China has expanded its academic outreach to the rest of the world. And we have in our studio Mr. Phil Beatty, the Chief Knowledge Officer of the Times Higher Education. It is, in fact, one of the most acclaimed university rankings in the world. Phil, good to see you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
You have a ranking. People would wonder, where does the number come from? So what are you ranking about? What are some of the most important indicators and weightings applicable in the ranking that you have, and also some of the other rankings people see around the world?
So I think it's always very important, if you look at a ranking, you need to look at the methodology, because you need to know what the number means.
Right.
So
and whether the ranking is for sure the ranking.
Yeah, sometimes they can be a beauty parade, they can be based purely on a survey, or they can be based on quite spurious
commercial interest as well.
Absolutely.
We all know that.
So the Times Higher Education ranking, we've kind of created an ideal of a world-class university. So we look at 13 different indicators.
Tell me more about that.
So we look across a range. We look at the teaching environment, so things like faculty-student ratios, the resources available to a university, its reputation. But primarily we look at research. So we examine about 13 million publications, 70 million citations to those papers to understand how influential the research is from the university. We analyze that. We also look at the international outlook, so their ability to attract international students and international collaborations. And then we look at their work with industry, the third mission of a university, knowledge transfer.
Well, you got the geopolitics. In your country, there's Brexit. And there's also the rise of nationalism, unilateralism. So will universities still be the place in which academic cooperation still exists?
It's funny, actually. Just 2 years ago, I think, I was in Davos, and President Xi was there, but also Theresa May was there, the former British Prime Minister, and Donald Trump. And Theresa May in the UK and Donald Trump in America were talking these nationalist stories. Theresa May was talking about a hard Brexit, leaving the European Union. Donald Trump was pushing a nationalist agenda, and it was President Xi who was saying, we want to be global, we want to be an open, responsible country. And I think that's going to be very significant. There's already signs that the UK universities are getting more isolated. They're losing talent because Europeans are less comfortable studying and working in the United Kingdom.
Does it also show in the rankings?
I think it's a little bit early to see. But the British universities, apart from Oxford and Cambridge, who cling on to the very high spots, a lot of the second wave British universities are starting to lose a bit of ground. With Brexit, I think they'll lose reputation, they'll lose talent, and they'll certainly lose money because they have less access to these huge European research funds. So I think the balance of power has already been shifting more in favor of the East, particularly China and East Asia. And I suspect that balance will continue to tip eastwards.
Are you saying this because you're in China and you're sitting in a studio of CCTV?
Well, I've said that in the United Kingdom. As a Brit, I'm extremely concerned about Brexit. I think it'll harm our universities. I believe in openness, I believe in collaboration and internationalization, so I advocate that all around the world, and I'm very happy to say to British universities and the British government, we need to protect our assets in Britain, and we need to be continuing to be open to talent and open for business, and it's important that we strive to do that.
In the university rankings, before I come into the studio, I did study a little bit, Phil, about your field. So it seems that the U.S. universities are still in most of the top positions, the top 200 so-called. And the UK, of course, with the on the very top, Oxford University still there as the #1 in the world. And meanwhile, you have Chinese universities, Chinese mainland universities. Tsinghua the 23rd, Peking University 24th, and developing countries as well, Vietnam, Brunei, and these are the names that you do not see earlier in the rankings are now coming in. What is driving this change?
Well, I think fundamentally the success story of the rankings over the last decade, I think, has been China. They've been getting the beneficiaries of great reform. The 1990s, the excellence initiatives implemented in China have worked. You know, they've built infrastructure, they've improved productivity, they're improving the quality of universities in terms of their research activity. And actually the Chinese model of investing in universities as nation builders, as drivers of the economy, has been emulated in other developing countries, not as successfully as China, but I think China is an example to the rest of the world that if you invest in great universities, you change your economy, you move to a knowledge economy, a skills and education economy, not a manufacturing economy. And I think that's changing, and I think other nations are copying China. What I think is very interesting is that the public universities in America, some of the great names like UC Berkeley, Berkeley, by the way, has special car parking spaces for the Nobel Prize winners. But Berkeley is a public
Probably
university.
that helps also with the ranking. I don't know whether that's one of the indicators, but go ahead.
They are suffering from funding cuts because they depend on state money, on taxpayer dollars.
Yeah.
They have seen cuts, and actually what we are seeing is the number of public universities in the top 200 are slowly declining. Over 5 years, we've lost about 9 US publics from the top 200. In that same period, China's gone from 2 to 7. So there's a slow convergence where the US publics are starting to drop out and Chinese universities are moving in there.
But you know, there's one phenomenon we haven't talked about. That is the Chinese students. The Chinese students and the Chinese students, they're everywhere in the world. Whether it's the UK or Australia or many parts of the United States still, they're looking at the Chinese students as a way for their resource, where the money comes from. And they're also looking at it as the potential of their education expand around the world. But there's also the issue related to this, whether they're being treated fairly, whether the tuition should be as much higher than the local students, and whether there will be real academic resource shared with the Chinese students, given the now geopolitical situation between China and the United States. So, Phil, what do you make of this interesting new phenomenon, which is called Chinese students?
Well, I think there's no question that there are universities in Britain and in Australia that almost would be at risk of collapse if it wasn't for international students and if it wasn't for Chinese students. And I know there are postgraduate courses in Britain that wouldn't exist without the Chinese postgraduates. I've just been to Sydney in August in Australia. They are utterly dependent on China.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a wonderful thing in the sense that it's promoting this, it contributes to world peace. Bringing different cultures and people together to understand each other better is a wonderful thing. And it's wonderful for Australia because they gain all this money, but they gain, most importantly, collaboration and friendship and understanding. But the risk, of course, is you're absolutely right, that if we see, or if those nations, Australia and Britain, if they see Chinese students as simply a means to fund themselves and keep themselves afloat, then there's a huge problem, because all students are very discerning. They've made a big investment. If they get a bad experience, they will return home. They'll tell their friends. They'll tell their families. Maybe the media will know. So the biggest risk, I think, to Australia, for Britain, is they must not be seen to be exploiting Chinese students. They have to deliver quality education, a quality experience. And sometimes it feels that is at risk a little, because they're so dependent on the money that perhaps they can risk the quality a little bit. And we must avoid that if they want to keep afloat.
Phil, what a pleasure. It's always wonderful to talk about education, and certainly university with its important role in education. What a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. Good night.